Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We just wanted to do a quick webinar on what we've been looking at regarding the CARES Act, specifically for fishery, aquaculture, and seafood businesses. And I know that many of you are working on resources for your state and your program, and this is not intended to try to reinvent the wheel or duplicate anything that your programs are doing. We've been asked by NOAA Fisheries to take a close look at the CARES Act and the variety of programs and benefits that are in there. There are likely going to be additional pieces of legislation for Congress. And so we're hoping that we can be a clearinghouse of information and really a resource to support you as you are working with your stakeholders. And so throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box. And so I have other members of the National Sea Grant Law Center are watching the chat box. They will be recording the questions that are asked. And if we can't answer them right now, we will be doing research and posting a frequently asked questions on our website. So with that, just to give you an overview of what we wanted to talk about this morning, just a quick introduction and background for folks that might not know who we are, then an overview of the payroll protection program, then the economic injury disaster loans. Then we have some hypotheticals that we wanted to run through. If we have time, we'll touch on the unemployment provisions and then open it up for questions and answers. And so we're gonna leave folks on mute to reduce the background noise, but we'll be using the chat box, so type away. Just to let you know who we are, so the National Sea Grant Law Center is one of the 34 Sea Grant programs. We're based at the University of Mississippi School of Law. We were established back in 2002 to provide non-advocacy legal research, outreach, and education services to the wider Sea Grant network. And so, as I mentioned, we did receive a request from NOAA Fisheries to help them understand more about the CARES Act provisions, but also we were kind of starting to look at these things on our own as well. So last week, we launched a new webpage. The link is on the screen. These slides will be made available after the webinar. So we encourage you to go and check out the website. Let us know if the type of information that we are sharing is useful and what else you might need. Sorry. People requesting to get in, distracting for a minute. Our COVID-19 outreach is being conducted in partnership with the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Legal Program. So on the call with me today, so I should have introduced myself. I'm Stephanie Otts, the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center. Catherine Janessi and Tara Bowling, our research counsel, senior staff attorneys with the Law Center. Zachary Klein is also on the call. He's our Ocean and Coastal Law Fellow. And Christina Alexander is the senior staff attorney with the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Legal Program. So there's 5 of us involved with this project and working to answer questions. Okay, so before we dig into the specifics, just wanted to give some kind of general recommendations for if you are currently working with stakeholders in your state. So regardless of what type of program they may be looking at or what type of assistance they need, they're going to need documentation of economic loss or what their income or expenses were the year before. So folks should start now, if they're not already, compiling documentation. So tax filings, income statements, expense reports, anything that they might be able to use to demonstrate an economic loss or to demonstrate what they earned last year. Businesses and individuals should be reaching out to their bankers or lawyers if they have existing relationships to talk to them about what their options are. If they don't have those existing relationships, then they should definitely be reaching out to small business development centers in their states. Those have relationships with state small business administration offices, and they are set up to provide guidance. And so they are kind of a great resource for people needing specific information about their own situations. And also, people will probably need to be persistent, but patient. This is a large, obviously, effort by Congress to get money out quickly. They are setting up programs that usually take a year or more to roll out in a couple of days. And so there are bound to be challenges, there is bound to be confusion, and not every program is going to be a good fit for every business or every individual. So it's going to take time for the federal agencies to get their guidance out, to get their application processes up and running. And that's difficult, obviously, for individuals and businesses that are in financial need, but that's just going to be the reality of the situation. And so to help manage expectations about how clear we can be in the middle of a crisis, there are not answers to a lot of the questions that you are likely getting. So the first program that's been getting a lot of attention is the Paycheck Protection Program loans. So this is an image. We have been sharing this slide in social media and is also available separately on our website. So what the point of this program is to provide an incentive and funding for businesses to keep employees on their payroll. So there is a covered period between February 15th, 2020 and June 30th. Applications for small businesses opened last Friday. The window for applications from independent contractors is this Friday, April 10th, which we'll talk about in a minute. So businesses must have been in operation on February 15th, have less than 500 employees, and been impacted by COVID-19. It includes a very broad range of eligible entities or businesses. So you can be small nonprofits, sole proprietors, independent contractors, others. Loans are for 2 years with a 1% interest rate. The amount of the loan is, the max is 2.5 times the average monthly payroll cost. Payroll costs include salary, wages, commissions, some benefits that are paid to employees as part of their salary, like medical and sick leave, health insurance costs. A business cannot include compensation for each employee above 100,000. This program does have loan forgiveness. So 8 weeks after the loan is given, a business can request for the loan to be forgiven. Forgiveness is 100% of the loan if they follow the requirements. And so they must use 75% of the loan to pay payroll costs, and they cannot reduce the number of employees or wages or salaries for an individual employee by 25%. So if you get a loan and you spend 50% of the loan on something else, like paying your mortgage, then the forgiveness amount will be reduced. Independent contractors are treated a little differently under the program, and this is critical for the fishing and seafood industry, at least from what we've been hearing, is so that many crew members on fishing fleets are not employees. They're not receiving W-2s. So they may be, receiving 1099 forms from their company, or maybe they're getting a share of the catch. So they are considered self-employed. So when we get into the hypotheticals, you'll see that the business owner cannot include the expenses paid to independent contractors as part of their payroll expense calculations. And that's because independent contractors can apply on their own. And so this is intended to prevent double dipping. So starting April 10th, independent contractors can apply for their own Paycheck Protection Program loans. They have to have been in operation on February 15th. And just like small businesses, loans are meant to cover payroll and to make mortgage, rent, or utility payments. Do have to certify that you've been affected by COVID-19. So you're going to need some sort of, documentation or justification for how you have not been able to pay your salary because of COVID-19. The amount is the same, 2.5 times the average monthly payroll costs, some capped at $100,000 in 1 year. And again, the loans can be forgiven if you follow the rules. For independent contractors, as I mentioned, there are documentation requirements that are a bit different than the small business. They need to be able to establish eligibility. Application documentations could include, and this is from the SBA's interim rule that they issued last Thursday, payroll processor records, payroll tax filings, Form 1099 miscellaneous, if you've received that, or income and expenses from a sole proprietorship. If you don't have this type of documentation, you'd have to provide some sort of alternative documentation, which may be at the discretion of the bank that the person or business is working with. And so it may be that they would accept a 2018 tax return, 2019 tax return if you filed their taxes already. But this is an open question right now that is still evolving. What type of documentation independent contractors and other self-employed individuals might need. This is just a recap of the loan forgiveness provisions. These are the same for both small businesses and independent contractors. It is 100% forgiveness if 75% spent on payroll. You have the same number of employees as the same time last year, so you haven't laid anybody off. You can rehire until June 30th to bring back those people. So there's a window for businesses to bring people back on that they might have laid off before the CARES Act provisions went into effect. And you can't reduce salary or wages more than 25% on one employee. So I know that's a lot to take in. So we thought it might be helpful to run through some hypotheticals of how this might work in the fishing industry based on what we've been hearing from industry folks in Sea Grant that are working with them. So the first hypothetical is a more straightforward one. So you have a boat owner that has employees. So employees are being paid with W-2s. So let's say the boat owner's annual pay is $30,000. He then has 3 employees that are paid with W-2s for a total of $45,000. So under the CARES Act provisions for the PPP, that gives that owner annual eligible payroll expenses of $75,000. So the loan amount allowed is 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. So the monthly payroll expenses in this hypothetical would be $6,250. Multiply that by 2.5, they would be eligible for a PPP loan at $15,625. You can use the money for payroll, mortgage interest, rent, utility, and interest on debt incurred before February 15th. However, no more than 25% of the loan may be used on those non-payroll expenses to get complete loan forgiveness. So the second hypothetical, so what changes then if the boat owner actually works with independent contractors? And so he doesn't give his crew members W-2s, he gives them 1099s. So same annual pay, $30,000, 3 workers paid with 1099s, $45,000. But the independent contractors' payroll expenses, well, they're not payroll expenses, they're expenses to contractors. They cannot be included in the annual eligible payroll expenses. So the only eligible expenses are the $30,000 for the boat owner's pay. So divide that by 12, that's 2,500. Multiply it by 2.5. He's only eligible for a loan of 6,250. So it significantly reduces the amount of the maximum loan, which obviously changes the calculation from the business owner about whether this type of relief is helpful, and whether other programs might be better in his situation. But again, that 62, the other issue is the 6,250, 75% of that has to go to salary. So if the owner actually needs the money to pay other things besides salaries, he's not going to have as much flexibility with the loan and could lose some of the forgiveness amount because it's not going directly to his salary, because that's the only salary that's eligible. So hypo 3, then what about the independent contractors? So moving from the boat owner to the crew member. So we're just making numbers up to make the math easier, but let's just say the crew member makes $30,000. Monthly income, 2,500. Multiply by 2.5, that's 6,250. So the math is kind of the same, but you can see that, this is for the individual. He would get a loan of $6,250 for 8 weeks to cover, the income that was lost due to COVID-19. So we'll circle back to this, but another thing to keep in mind with the PPP program is that it is integrated or overlaps somewhat with the EIDL loans. So these are economic injury disaster loans that Kathy's going to talk about next. But if you already have applied and have an advance under the EIDL program for $2,000 or $10,000, that can be rolled into the PPP loan. And so it changes the calculation. So if you have annual payroll of $75,000, average monthly payroll 6,250, multiply by 2.5, that gives you an eligible loan of 15,625. Then you add the advance that you got from the EIDL loan into that, and it makes your maximum loan amount 25,625. So it's a bit of a nuanced technical detail, but it does allow people who had been getting EIDL loans up until now to roll them into their PPP loans. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk more about the EIDL loans. Oh, Kathy, I'm trying to unmute you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me now, Steph?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, it's fine. So the next program we wanted to cover for you all this morning is this Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which is a long existing program with the Small Business Administration that has been around to help businesses, renters, and homeowners in places that have been affected by declared disasters. But what the CARES Act has done is kind of tweaked the program a little bit. So now under the CARES Act, small businesses, cooperatives, nonprofits, sole proprietors, and independent contractors in all 50 states, DC, and the territories are eligible, since all of them have been declared disasters due to COVID-19. And so the loan amount for this program is a lot higher than the PPP. So you could get a loan for up to $2 million if you needed that for your business. The interest rates are higher than that PPP program that Stephanie just went over. So for small businesses, the interest rate is 3.75%. And then for others like nonprofits, it would be 2.75%. And so one of the tweaks that the CARES Act has done is to create this advanced program that really serves as a grant program. And so when you make the application for your EIDL loan, or the business can go in and kind of request this loan advance of $10,000, which I'm going to go over in a little bit more detail in later slides. And what's important to note here, and I'll discuss later, is that that grant money does not need to be repaid, but it will affect the forgiveness provisions under the PPP if you get both of the loans. The other thing the CARES Act has done is it said that you only need to be in business starting on January 31st, 2020. In the past, you would have had to been in a year. But as I'm going to discuss in a later slide, your loan application is going to require these forms to kind of prove that you were, sustaining an injury due to COVID-19. So it may be that you need to have documentation before that January 31st, 2020 date. And as Stephanie mentioned before, this slide is actually an image that we've also been sharing on social media and is available on our website if you go to our COVID page. Okay, next slide, Steph. So as I mentioned, the CARES Act creates this loan advance program that really serves as a grant, and the statute itself refers to it both as a grant and a loan, so that can be a little confusing for people. But when you go into the EIDL loan process now, as you would apply through SBA, you can click that you want this advance of $10,000. And so it doesn't need to be repaid, even if you ultimately are denied an EIDL loan by the SBA or you decide not to take a bigger loan than the $10,000. And you're ideally supposed to receive these funds 3 days after your successful application with the SBA. So it's supposed to be that this money will get you very quickly. And the act itself says that this $10,000 can be used for paying sick leave to employees who can't work due to COVID-19, maintaining payroll, meeting increased costs for materials due to supply chain disruptions, making your rent or mortgage payments, and repaying obligations that can't be met due to revenue losses. And through this, if you go through the process, you're going to click you want this advance, and SBA is going to ask for your bank name, your account number, and routing number to kind of get you this money very quickly. Okay, next slide, Steph. So the documentation requirements, as I said, the CARES Act waived this requirement that you need to have been in business for 1 year. So all you need to be is in business on January 31st, 2020. But when you make the loan application process, or fishermen or businesses you're helping, they're going to be required to document showing that the business has suffered economic injury due to COVID-19. And so through guidance that SBA has been releasing since the CARES Act has come out, and in the past they've required this, that they're going to require having 12 months prior to January 31st, 2020, gross revenue, cost of goods sold, lost rent, cost of operating expenses, other reimbursements you might get, such as business insurance, and your number of employees. So while the statute itself is saying only January 31st, it may be that a business is required to have documentation before that time period. And so that is definitely something for a newer business is going to have to work with their local SBA people to kind of work that out, because it's kind of an issue that this waiver of the 1 year has created with how is a business going to establish they've suffered a loss. And in guidance, SBA has also stated that there's no threshold in either a percentage that you're down or a dollar amount. You just have to have suffered some kind of economic injury. Okay. So the EIDL advance and the PPP, we've gotten questions about how they work together, and they do interact with each other in a couple of important ways. So you can apply for both an EIDL and PPP funding, including the loan advance, but you're not allowed to use those funds from both loans for the same purpose. You have to apply them to different things. So if you received an EIDL not used for payroll expenses between January 31st and April 3rd, it will be refinanced into your PPP loan. And for a business, that would be a good thing because, as I said, the EIDL program's at 3.75% interest, the PPP's at 1%. So getting to be able to roll that into the 1% loan is advantageous for the business. The EIDL advance is not used to calculate your PPP loan amount, and that's because the EIDL advance doesn't need to be repaid. And I'll go through an example to show kind of how that works. But if you receive that EIDL advance of $10,000, that grant, the amount of your advance, whatever it is, will reduce the amount of your forgivable loan under the PPP. And so I'll go through a hypothetical to kind of explain to you guys how that would work. So as an example, say a business receives an EIDL loan of $25,000 on February 22nd, 2020 to make a mortgage payment. So since that loan was made between this January 31st and April 3rd period, it goes into the calculation of your new PPP loan. So it'll be rolled into it. And you're eligible for that PPP because the loan was not used for payroll. And then subsequent to that, say a business applies and receives an EIDL advance of $10,000 on April 16th, 2020. So that would not go into the calculation of your PPP loan amount, but it will reduce the forgivable amount of the PPP loan. So let's say the business has an annual payroll of $120,000 and no employees make more than $100,000, which will reduce, as Stephanie went over, the amount you could get under the PPP. So that would make the average monthly payroll $10,000. The PPP loan amount would be 2.5 times that $10,000 for $25,000. Your PPP loan would roll in that $25,000 EIDL loan from February 22nd. And so the business would have a $50,000 PPP loan at that 1%. Okay. So just to review what I just said, you have this PPP loan of a total of $50,000, at $25,000, part of it is for that payroll expenses, and you have an EIDL advance of $10,000. So the way that PPP loan forgiveness would work is over the 8 weeks after your PP loan, you know, the business spends, say, $20,000 on payroll, $2,000 on rental fees for using fishing dock space, $500,000 on utility payments, and $200 on new fishing gear. So under the PPP, the forgivable amount would be that $20,000 of payroll, the $2,000 of the rental fees, plus the $500 on utility payments, because those are all allowed expenses under the PPP. You couldn't get back the $200 on fishing gear because that's not an allowable expense. But you would have to subtract from that the $10,000 EIDL advance loan, which would give a total forgivable amount under the PPP of $12,500. So that EIDL loan reduces what would have been $22,500 under the PPP to $12,500. And so this chart is a work in progress as we keep adding information, but it's a quick snapshot of kind of explaining, you know, how these two loan programs are working together and how they are the same and different. And so for the EIDL loans, it's going to go through December 20th, 2020. For the Paycheck Protection Program, that program ends on June 30th. The max loan amount under the EIDL is $2 million. The PPP could go up to $10 million if a business could get that much money, but again, it's that 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. The maturity date for the EIDL loan is a lot longer, it's 30 years. With the PPP, it's 2 years with a max of 10. The application for EIDL is with SBA, while with PPP, you have to go through a qualified SBA lender, which is why in the beginning, Steph kind of made that good point for businesses to really be talking to their banks about what they're going to need if they're going to go through this PPP program. The interest rate on EIDL is higher at 3.75. PPP is 1%, which is why it's, you know, good the CARES Act allows those loans from that short time period from January to April to be able to roll into that 1%. You need no payments under EIDL for up to a year, where for PPP it's 6 months to 1 year. And then this terms of forgiveness, the EIDL is not really a forgiveness thing, but that $10,000 advance does not need to be repaid. So it serves as a grant. Under PPP, it's forgivable if you keep your workers employed, spend all your funds within the 8-week period after the loan is originated to you. And that's the time you have the funds in hand as a business. You spend 75% on payroll, the other 25% only on allowable uses. And again, that amount of an EIDL advance is going to be deducted from the forgiveness amount. And then allowable uses traditionally under EIDL were that payroll, fixed expense, account payable, and then CARES Act tweaks that a little to say the advance can be used for those things I had mentioned, like paying sick leaves, maintaining payroll, meeting costs, making rent or mortgage payments, and repaying obligations that you can't meet due to revenue loss. And as Steph went over with PPP, it's that payroll benefits, mortgage interest, utilities, and other debts prior to March 15th, 2020.
Thanks, Kathy. So I'm sure everyone's heads are spinning from that. And at the risk of adding one more thing, we did want to mention the pandemic unemployment assistance because it could be very helpful to fishermen. So under the CARES Act, it authorized a $600 a week supplement above state unemployment benefits. And it also made unemployment benefits available to self-employed workers. So these workers are normally not able to tap into state unemployment. So independent contractors and other self-employed workers, they now can, and they can receive the same benefits for a max of 39 weeks. You have to apply through your state unemployment office. Every state is different. Some states have applications that self-employed workers can apply and they don't seem to be having trouble. In other states, that's different. So if fishermen or others are looking at this and trying to apply and having trouble, it may just be that the state employment office needs a little time to get their systems up and running to accept applications or claims from self-employed workers. But this is another one to keep in mind and to be letting people know about, because it's another potential benefit for the industry. Okay, so that's our overview presentation. I've seen questions coming in. We're going to go back through and try to clarify and answer the ones we can. If Kathy and I don't know the answer off the top of our head, we will, as I mentioned, do additional research and get back to people with those questions. So, okay, first one, does being in operation mean that you must have been actively fishing or just that you had worked as an independent contractor prior to February 15th? I think it's the latter, because the way they define independent contractor is, you know, someone conducting a trade or business. And so if you were fishing last year, but obviously you're not fishing now because nobody's buying the product, they're looking at what you have to be in business by February 15th, but they're looking at what you were doing last year, what your income was last year. So regarding the PPP program, is it okay if employees are not the same individual, but that you have the same number of employees as last year? Yes, they don't have to be the exact same people. You just have to be employing the same number of people as you did last year. So for Hypo 3, the independent contractor gets $6,000 and pays themselves a salary. Most people pay their rent with their salary. Will doing that negate the ability to get forgiveness? No, I don't believe so, because you got the loan to pay your salary, and then we all spend our salaries on lots of different things. And so as long as you're paying the compensation the way you normally would, what the person who receives the salary should be fine. Kathy, would you agree with that? Is monthly income for independent contractors calculated based on 2019 average monthly income or based on 2020 average monthly income after February 15th? So there is a set window for looking at, I believe it is February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, for making the average monthly income payroll calculations. If you have seasonal workers, the SBA says that you can choose to use March 1st, 2019 as when you start to make those calculations. But yes, they're looking at payroll expenses from last year. Someone asked, I've seen guidance that the advance payment from EIDL is based on the number of employees you have, minus about 1,000 employees. How does that work if you have independent contractors? I have not seen that guidance. I haven't seen any qualification of the $10,000 advance, but that is something that we can look into and verify. Would fishing license fees be covered under acceptable expenses? If that's in reference to the PPP program, I don't believe so, because that is very narrow. It's payroll expenses, mortgage, interest, rent, utilities, and interest on debt. But that's something that we can look into. For the EIDL program, it's a little broader, so there might be more flexibility in EIDL. Would things like lower prices for seafood products compared to the year prior count towards documenting an economic injury? So that would be a good question for the banker or financial institution or SBA about whether that would work. I think they would be looking more for lower sales to demonstrate that you have economic injury. But if you know how much fish you sold last year and can document the prices, and then you can document that you've been unable to sell any fish this year, or you've had to sell them at a lower price, that is certainly worth discussing with the banks. Will loan forgiveness be counted as income and taxed in the future? So we need to write something up on this, but I was on a webinar yesterday and the presenter said that no, when the PPP loan is forgiven, there is a provision in the CARES Act that says it will not be treated as income the way forgivable debt forgiveness normally is. So we will double check on that one, but I think that it won't be considered income. Yes, we are recording it. So as long as all the technology works, as soon as we finish this up and can get it posted on the website, we'll share both the webinar and the slides. Some fishing businesses' revenue period spans the end date for these programs. Should businesses try to apply for assistance for projected amounts earned beyond June 30th? I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question for the SBA institutions. Certainly, I think it's worthwhile to pursue these programs, and Congress is working on another package. More money may be put into these programs. End dates may change. So getting that relationship built with the bank and starting to talk about what your long-term needs are versus short-term, I think would be very good guidance for businesses to be considering both the programs that can help them in the short term, but what they might need in the long term. Yeah, so if Maryland aquaculture shellfish industry had a bad year, how would this likely impact their financial performance? And would it be taken into account? That I don't know. It could be that some sectors aren't able to tap into the amount of assistance they need because income was down last year for some reason. It could also be like businesses that maybe didn't do as much for other reasons, maybe for family or health reasons, weren't as active last year, so had lower income than normal. So yes, because they're only looking at one snapshot in time last year, businesses that could impact businesses differently. And I haven't seen any guidance related to that, but we can keep an eye out. How will applying for PPP affect pandemic unemployment assistance? That's a very good question. My gut tells me you probably can't take advantage of both, but we haven't seen that guidance yet. So we will look and see if somewhere in the CARES Act it has a cross-reference in the unemployment to the PPP or vice versa. So does the EIDL loan have a requirement on number of employees? It has to, I think there is the limit on the business, so it has to be a small business, so less than 500 employees. But I'm not sure if that answers the question, but we can look at that. Does the EIDL 10,000 count as taxable revenue? So that's a similar question to the PPP one. The EIDL loan advance was not talked about in what I heard yesterday, so that's a research question for us. If the PPP loan is, it's probably the advance is as well, but we'll see. Where they can get paper forms. I don't know if there's official paper forms being produced. Certainly there are, the SBA has a great website that has all of the forms for borrowers and lenders, so you can access them in PDF, and so those could be printed out, so at least the borrower might know ahead of time what they were looking for. But I don't know that the SBA or any of the banks would be producing their own paper forms. But we can send, I think if you go to sba.gov, their like coronavirus COVID stuff pops up right away, but we can also get you the links. Our PPP loan forgives loans first come, first serve. The loan forgiveness isn't, the loan itself is. So if you've heard like it's first come, first serve, however many people they can get into the system to get the loans. But once you had the loan, it would be forgiven if you follow the guidelines. So that's not dependent on getting in the line once you get the loan. Question about if you have a product that takes 2 to 4 years to reach market size. So they would have been in business last year, but their products were not market size and they can't be sold. That's a good question. I think we'll have to wait for more guidance coming out of the EIDL program to whether there are going to be additional benefits or resources available for these unique situations where you just can't prove the income, the economic injury just because of the unique aspects of the industry. So that's a good question for Sea Grant and us to kind of consider and look at. Okay. Well, that was whirlwind. I feel like I was talking a mile a minute. I can give folks a little time if you have a couple of more questions. We are continuing to try to produce resources. I hope that this was helpful to go through some hypotheticals and kind of dig into how some of the programs are working. We've just started looking at the tax credit provision. So there's a whole nother section of tax credits that are available under the CARES Act. There's also different provisions coming from other laws like the Family First Law. So our website is being updated all the time. We also have, there's also the Fishery Participant Program that is being administered by NOAA. That guidance will be coming out in the future about that. So stay tuned. Send us your questions. We cannot directly assist individual businesses or fishermen or seafood processors because of our restrictions on practicing law. But we can provide general information to you and Sea Grant agents across the country as you're trying to figure these things out. So the more we know about the questions you're getting and wrestling with, the better we can develop our products to suit your needs and we can do additional webinars in the future if it was helpful. So thanks. We're getting a lot of thanks and that this was helpful. So we'll work on getting it posted so you can share it with others in your program. And thanks again. And if anybody in your program got stuck in the waiting room, I apologize. It was the first time using it, and it's hard to track everything, but thank you.